This is my grandmother. Her name is Roswitha Elizabeth Helton, and she was born on June 7, 1943, in Kassel, Germany. Kassel, Germany is a medium-sized town located in the heart of Germany on the Fulda River. My grandmother grew up there and has been back to visit since, as she still has many family members that still live in Kassel and even live in the same house. Although my grandmother was just a baby during the war, she still has vivid stories that were passed down to her from her mother and from her grandmother.
I do remember the the time afterwards, and I remember when I would walk into my hometown, and we lived on the outskirts of the town. We didn't live right in town. My hometown was destroyed by 85% during several bombings during the war, and that happened like in 43 and 44 because they had heavy industry.
The bombings my grandmother refers to were a set of Allied strategic bombing attacks which took place from February 1942 to March 1945. In a single deadliest raid on October 22, 1943, 150,000 inhabitants were bombed out, at least 10,000 people died, the vast majority of the city center was destroyed, and the fire of the most severe air raid burned for 7 days. The U.S. First Army captured Kassel on April 3, 1945, where only 50,000 inhabitants remained, versus 236,000 in 1939.
My birth name was Rothstein. It was a very Jewish name, and I know that the Gestapo did look into the background of the family.
Mm.
So we think that if we were, that the great-grandfather converted to Christianity, and then they only went back, I think, 2 generations. So I would say we maybe lucked out there. Otherwise, I don't know. We were next to the street I lived on. About 2 streets further on, there was a street and they had so-called villas, and a lot of Jewish business people had their very nice homes there. They were usually just one-family homes, maybe 2. And at one point, my grandmother, when she saw, the yellow star, she kind of knew what that was. And she knew so many of these people personally because they would come to the store, and then all of a sudden they didn't come. And my grandmother asked, Mrs. Sohn, why are you not coming to the store? And she would say, well, we don't have any stamps, the ration cards. And the later part of the war, people became ration cards for certain things. And my grandmother knew that they had children. So what she told me, she said, she told this one family, because I had several children, that she would put in the evening when it was dark, food by the trash can, which was on the side of the house, and that she wanted them to come and get it. And that's how she helped in her way.
Oh.
Which I thought was very, very nice.
Yeah.
But she said she could not really do anything. There were people in the neighborhood, there were so much Nazis that one time when my grandmother said good morning to the customer, this one gentleman, he was a higher ranking Nazi, he said, Mrs. Benner, it is Heil Hitler. And then he would raise his arm, and she just totally ignored it. But then she knew certain people. If she knew that they were Nazis, she would just not say anything, But she had to be careful, because how they would get to you, it wasn't that they said, well, if you don't do this or that, we have you come down to the Gestapo. They would say, we're going to ask your daughter to come to the Gestapo headquarters in Kassel.
Mm.
And that is something, if you yourself go, that's you.
Right.
But if they threaten your family member, then you get much more scared. And that's one of those were some of the ways how they got to Germans. So in her little ways, she helped. My grandmother was very sweet, very nice. Yeah. It was a police state.
Mm-hmm.
You really, I read a lot of books afterwards, and because what really helped Hitler was that there were a lot of little Hitlers, people who came all of a sudden to power, and had power over other people, and that's exactly why this all survived, or why it even came up. They might have been the ones who, after the First World War, maybe families or fortunes were destroyed or whatever, but they were envious. They were envious, and all of a sudden they had power, unlimited power. They could denounce you, and then at the Gestapo they were the worst ones.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't, I'm pretty sure there was not everybody at the Gestapo was horrible. Some of them had to more or less work there, and maybe they even helped people out. There are a lot of books on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the majority were horrible and enjoyed putting fear and pain and everything on other people. And that, at first it was only certain people, and only the Jewish people, and or the political people, or the handicapped people. Families who had a handicapped child, then all of a sudden the state would come and say, well, we want them all in these homes. But what they really did, they killed them. The families didn't know that in the beginning. And then they possibly felt powerless. They wouldn't know what to do because the state had so many rights. They took most of the rights away. When I went to school, hardly anybody talked about the war. That it seemed like that period had never happened.
Mm-hmm.
we would start with the Greek or Etruscan or the Egyptians or so, and then slowly get into the modern times. But then it was, very briefly. I think the Germans had a real desire of not thinking about it too much. And so eventually, they, the pressure, I think, from the world and what happened with the Jewish population, they had to face it at one point. I think we might never want to have a war on that scale ever again, because I don't think it's winnable. And warfare has really just changed, and I think this was the last big war where millions of people died.
Mm-hmm.
Soldiers too, millions, not just civilians. Now actually it's reversed. Now more civilians die and less soldiers die. So that to put that many men, now also women, into what is the saying?
Into harm's way?
Into harm's way, yeah. That I don't think anybody would support that anymore.